to pay tribute to former Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe at his funeral service today. For more on this and other issues, I'm joined by Gideon Chitanga, who's an Africa expert. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Let's talk about that funeral and the kind of leaders who turned out there. Does that say anything about who Robert Mugabe was?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it resonates with the kind of politics that former President Robert Mugabe identified with. He is known to be Pan-African. He is known to have been a key player on issues related to what we define as the South-South politics. So this mainly represents countries in Africa and countries in the global South as representing the global developing community of countries. And so the cross-section of leaders, I think they more identify with his advocacy around developmental issues, and particularly his unequivocal stance on how the West is related to Africa and the need to empower Africans. I think that's a very important part of his politics that will probably, that stands out, and for a long time he will be remembered for.
Mm-hmm. There's obviously been issues around a very contested legacy of former President of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, many speaking on the same things you were speaking about, but then also speaking about the economic conditions and a lot of the financial conditions of Zimbabweans at the time. What's your thoughts on that?
Certainly, his legacy is a difficult one. I think very contradictory. It's full of a layer that I would describe as rhetorically represented and quite well articulated. And this is what we have just commented on. Then there are realities of Zimbabweans, the deteriorating socio-economic conditions, which culminated in what we identify as Zimbabwe's economic crisis that badly deepened since 2000. And that came with violation of human rights, that came with contested and disputed electoral outcomes from all elections that were held in Zimbabwe from 2000, well, up to the current one. The outcomes have been disputed, but that situation worsened under the presidents of Mugabe. A lot of human rights violations and a lot of Zimbabwean citizens were killed specifically for their political beliefs. I think a critical era as well in the 80s, what we call the Gukurahundi case in Zimbabwe. Some call it a civil war, others call it just a case of instability. But it has deeper implications that has divided Zimbabwe ethnically between the Ndebele and the Shona. But beyond this, I actually view Zimbabwe as an extremely fragmented society that is deeply divided at multiple levels. So it's not just the human rights issues separately. It's not that just the economy. It's not just the Gukurahundi issue. This is a country that now has people openly negatively identifying themselves ethnically as the Zulus or Karankas and other smaller ethnic fragmented communities within Zimbabwe. But the bad part of it is when negative ethnicism is infused into political agendas, then you have a dangerous situation, because that also goes into public policy issues and issues of distribution of economic and social public goods. And some people would start to say they find themselves marginalized to what they are rightly entitled to as citizens, because they do not belong within or belong with a particular community of Zimbabwe. Mm-hmm.
Let's come back to that funeral service that took place. We know that former President Robert Mugabe won't be buried for about another month, but there was a commemoration that took place today there. Can we make anything of the amount of people who attended? The stands were not packed to the rafters in a lot of the footage that we've shown. What do we read from that?
So there are a lot of things. I think that naturally Zimbabweans are Africans. So when there's a situation of bereavement, we all want to share our feelings with those who have lost their loved one. And to that extent, we saw a lot of Zimbabweans coming out, I think, when the board of former President Mugabe came to Zimbabwe and so on. But I take it that there are two elements. So the other part is curiosity. Zimbabweans are just curious. This is a man who actually raises emotions, and for fair reasons, quite conflicted emotions. Some want to see whether Mugabe is really gone. Some believe in this man, his political ideas, and they can feel the loss. But Zimbabwe is in a bad socio-economic situation. And I would take it that there's a limit to which people can go out and be part of this process given the problems they face at home. So after you come from a funeral of such an important personality, which dramatizes, other than the funeral itself, a lot of wealth and conditions that are quite different from what Zimbabweans have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. I think after that, Zimbabweans retreat to their shell and they go to houses which do not have mealie meal, which do not have cooking oil, which do not have running water. And part of these experiences, they trace them back to this man whom they are busy mourning over and trying to bury. So that, again, is part of the conflicted legacy. And I think that given the talk of the 30 days of funeral and then a private ceremony and so on, very soon or after today and tomorrow, probably just see Zimbabweans going back to their normal lives, worrying with availing basics to their families.
Mm-hmm. President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa speaking at that service that we're playing behind us, getting booed as he walked onto stage and managing to recover. Take us through that.
So I think that the concerns really, just to avoid repeating the whole thing, about the feelings of Zimbabweans, and I think generally Africans, about the unfortunate Afrophobic violence that we have seen. It's a difficult situation, I think, because this is where, against a lot of beliefs that are expressed in the sense of this idea of African brothers and so on, and a lot of regional and continental convergence at political, socio-economic, and socio-economic policy levels, you find Africans attacking each other. And I think South Africa is seen differently from other countries. This is one of the most enduring democracy. So if you go out of Africa, there are still people who see South Africa as such a huge economic giant and still believes in its political values as one of the most resilient democracies with very strong institutions. So the experience or the visuals of the violence really battered the image of this country, and it says a lot about the new leadership of South Africa. There's a sense out there that the leadership was not robust in its reaction and decisive in its actions, and quite loud in its condemnation of these unfortunate incidences. So that he went on to pass an apology is important. But I think that Zimbabweans and other Africans, and South Africans as well, need to get into a very serious conversations about Afrophobic attacks, or what others would call xenophobia, including defining what it exactly is, because there are different views about these experiences. But these are cycles that occur perennially. So this leadership has just faced this situation that we're coming out of. But I know for sure that President Zuma had to deal with xenophobia or Afrophobia. President Mbeki during his tenure have had to deal with this situation, but it's worsening. And I think there are serious underlying conditions, and these conditions require a diversity and multiplicity of key actors. The government, African nationals from other countries, other nationals who are not necessarily Africans. It also requires key actors who are part of small business communities within South African communities. It requires South African communities to engage with all this diversity. there's a lot of propaganda and lies, I think, and misinformation that goes around. And for me, the most unfortunate part is during the campaigns, the political leadership in South Africa, within the ANC, was actually drawn to take a position that I would call uncultural and totally unheard of in terms of statements they said referring to nationals, African nationals from other countries. So whether you like it or not, it's so difficult to take a neutral position. So to condemn xenophobia or to be soft on it and say and cover it as there are some criminal elements and so on. I think that it's just one way or another. So the government will have to say, we are pro this or we are not pro this, or acknowledge the socio-economic challenges which South Africans are facing and take responsibility. Clearly say, look, there are deep issues here that this country is facing, and the same, I think, challenges that South Africa is facing now are not new to post-colonial situations. If you look at other countries, within a decade or so, the honeymoon just evaporates, and whichever leadership is there is to confront the deep social structural issues. And I think this is where South Africa is. So the legacy of apartheid has to be dealt with, but in a dynamic way that looks at new socio-economic opportunities, and South Africans have to participate. I also think that foreigners who are legitimately in this country bring a lot of capital in terms of knowledge, skills, including knowledge and skills about the kind of economy that is built around small shops and small trades and so on. So how about engaging them and exploring how South Africans, those at least who are at that lowest level, can start to participate and work with these communities where they are doing legal business?
I'm glad that you brought that difference, and you spoke about the definitions, whether something is xenophobia or Afrophobia, because there's a discussion around what both of those things mean and how it relates to what we've just seen taking place.
So I think xenophobia, I would just broadly hatred of the other. It's a lack of knowledge and understanding of who that the other is, and because of that, it generates fear and suspicion. Right? But the same term, when it's Afrophobia, this is where we target, where Africans are targeted. So the definition is broadly the same, but it's now, when you talk of Afrophobia, it's specific, right? You are targeting your fellow Africans, right? Or Africans. It's Africans attacking Africans. And it's Africans saying to other Africans, you are responsible and you are doing all these negative things. It's a violation of these other Africans who are within our community on the basis of how we perceive who they are, what they do, and how they relate to us and relate to the others. And then the violence is just a manifestation. But underlying that violence, it's an attitude. The way government and civil society and other critical players then act, what they say can actually worsen or feed into these beliefs, then manifest in physical violence, where you see people starting to attack each other, where you see this disrespect, unbelievable disrespect to human life. So that's what Afrophobia is. And just to go a little bit deeper on that, there is a way, I think, in which the teaching of our histories can help also community start to understand and appreciate the element of who we are, right? If I can give an example, a quick example, there's a lot that is shared between the southern and the northern borders of South Africa. The Venda people, you find them on both borders. The Shangani people, you find them on the border of South Africa with Zimbabwe, and so on and so on. There are a lot of, the cultures are similar. So if our political leaders had not agreed at the Organization of African Unity to stick with the borders as defined at Berlin Conference 1894, we probably would be saying, okay, how as Africans can we belong as communities and cultures that we have historically been?
Gideon Chitanga, thanks so much for your time on SABC and giving us insight into those many issues that we unpacked. It's now time for a look at your weather details.
Thank you very much, Nzinga. Let's take a look at those conditions that we're expecting for the next couple of days. Starting off with tomorrow, expecting clear skies over most of the central interior, extending into Gauteng and Limpopo. We have a warning